So I just want to just speak for a few minutes really to start us off, and then we'll have a couple of short meditations. And after the second one, I'll leave a little bit of time. So if any of you want to talk about your experience of the practices, you can do so. It'd be lovely to hear. So I want to talk a little bit about thoughts and the thinking mind. So yeah, those of you that have been on retreat with me before are going to be quite familiar with this. But thoughts are quite subtle mind objects, and they're quite slippery. So it can be helpful to hear it again. I think the more I hear, if you like, hear practice instructions, then the more I realize how much I've forgotten, how much slips away from the mind, even though I feel like I have been practicing with this. So just a few things to say about working with thoughts. And the first one being that we are not practicing to make thoughts go away. Thoughts are not a problem. If we are regularly getting lost in big stories and thoughts, then you could say that's a problem. It's certainly in a way there's less chance of awareness growing. So we need to. What we're looking to do is to be aware of thoughts as they happen. And whether that's a lot of thoughts happening or whether that's just a few thoughts happening, it doesn't really matter. We're practicing thinking in awareness. Any object will do. So thoughts are just another mental object. But thoughts are, as I say, quite a slippery object, and that's partly because we identify, not consciously, but we identify very strongly with our thoughts as who we are. They're my thoughts, and I think this, and our attachments and identification with who we are is very much molded and worked out and furthered by our thoughts and by our thinking processes. So it's a bit counterintuitive, thinking in awareness, or knowing a thought as a thought while we're thinking. Yeah. So in the sense we're not relating to the content of the thought, what the thought is about. That may well be known. You're almost various unsuitable metaphors popping into my mind. Is there a suitable one? What I was thinking of is it's a bit like there's a load of people in a car, and you're not relating to all the people. You're relating to if you like, the structure. You're relating to what so the people represent the content, and all the metal and the bonnet and the doors and the wheels represent what make up a thought, how a thought feels in the mind. So we're looking, to know a thought as a thought. That's the primary thing, and what's secondary is the content, and it's the content that wraps us up inside it in its story and carries us off a long way. So one thing that can be helpful to do, and this is what we'll do in the first week exercise, is just put a soft mental label on some of those thoughts. This is not something that you necessarily want to do for very long, but in terms of just getting a sense different categories of thoughts or different ways of thinking. Labeling can be very helpful. You can label different functions of the mind. So things like remembering, all the thoughts that are about anything happening in the past. So remembering, or memory. You might just label it memory. So this is about similar to with the counting and the mindfulness of breathing. It's just a very soft mental label, and it's secondary to feeling and being aware of what's happening. It's a little conceptual tag, if you like, that just helps you identify and helps you not get lost in that type of thinking. So then there's planning. I'm sure we've all familiar with the planning mind, which takes us into the future. Planning, anticipating, fantasizing, sometimes, particularly if in meditation when it's all got a bit dreary or grim. I have a nice little fantasy when lockdowns ended and I'll go off to the coast for a few days, and whatever it is, we have our favorites. A couple of labels that can be really helpful in terms of how we get caught out by our thoughts are recognizing the mind that's judging in the sense of condemning or criticizing what's going on. Related to this one is the comparing mind. That sometimes we're comparing ourselves to others. Everybody else must be getting on so much better than I am, or I'm getting on so much better than everybody else must be because my practice is going so well. But sometimes, and perhaps more frequently, we're comparing ourselves to ourselves. You know, my practice isn't, it was going so well this morning and now it's all fallen apart. And yeah. So if we can just recognize that's just something the mind does. The mind compares. It compares the conceptual mind compares one thing to another. It's just something that it does. It doesn't have to carry so much weight or so much sting. You know, we can feel really deflated when we compare ourselves and we don't come out well on the comparison, and then inflated when we do come out really well. And they're like those opposites I talked about yesterday, of hope and hopelessness, or expectation and disappointment. We just find ourselves continually either lifted up or crashing down. But recognizing those can just mean that awareness is in the driving seat, if you like. We're not getting carried away with either of those temporary mind states. Repeating. So noticing a thought that you've had before, perhaps multiple times, can be really helpful and take some of the power out of it. Joseph Goldstein talks about, this was in the days of cassettes, so he'd say you could have the relationship tape that would get going, or the work tape, or the difficult person tape. And so basically, and sometimes he would say you can count them. So okay, so relationship tape for the third time, you know, or whatever it is. So these are all little ways of perhaps not taking our thoughts so seriously, not giving them quite as much power as we can do. And it helps us become a little bit more objective about what's happening in the mind. One of my favorites, which is quite good when the mind is a bit dull, or perhaps a little bit sleepy, but you can definitely label sleepiness in the mind or boredom. But what I call my can't be bothered mind. It's when motivation is a bit low, quite happy to sort of drift along, and I can be stopped in my tracks by, oh right, this is can't be bothered mind. It somehow makes it clearer what's happening, and makes it clear that can't be bothered mind state is not in line with Samprajanya that I talked about this morning. It's not in line with the overall direction, spiritual direction or goal. And sometimes we can just label thinking. We can just say thinking is happening, and that can be enough, and that can keep it very, very simple, because you don't want to be thinking too much. You don't want to be stimulating thoughts about what type of thoughts am I having. You want it to stay quite sort of low key and quiet in the mind. Maybe a couple of things. So one of the Burmese teachers that I sat with, Sayadaw U Pandita, he's dead now, but when he was alive, I used to think he was like the wrathful Vajrapani, which is my yidam, like wrathful Vajrapani in human form. He was this 80-year-old, very squat Burmese monk. He's probably under 5 foot, but, very sort of strong and very fierce. And he had this little saying. He said, "Any thought can arise in any mind at any time." He's pointing to, well, I think this is helpful in terms of not judging. It's like the mind can throw up all sorts of thoughts. We don't know some of the conditioned stuff that's gone along, that's created thoughts that will pop out, and sometimes they're petty thoughts, sometimes they're quite mean thoughts, sometimes they're kind and generous, but there's a bit of a mixed bag. And when thoughts arise that don't fit in with what we see as our self-view, there's a tendency perhaps to suppress them. So this phrase, any thought can arise in any mind at any time, in a sense just allows thoughts to be known just as thoughts. We don't have to take them personally as saying something about us, about what a great person we are or what a terrible person we are. It's thinking's happening, thoughts arising. And it can help lessen that, as I say, that sense of control or suppression or judgment that can come. So we're looking to have the same sense of thoughts as objects arising that are conditioned in their nature, and not something that we recognize for sure. We recognize whether they're skillful or unskillful, but without either suppressing them or indulging them, taking them further. We simply allow them to be recognized as a thought arising in awareness. Okay, maybe I'll leave it for there for the moment. And if you'd like to find yourself a way of sitting comfortably, sitting or standing or lying down. So before we start, I'm just going to read something from Sayadaw U Tejaniya, who's not dead, very much alive in Burma. He says, every time we recognize something that's wholesome, so skillful, then if we recognize what's wholesome, we have double wholesome. There is the wholesome or skillful that we do, and the awareness that is wholesome. If something is unwholesome, and we are at least able to recognize that it is unwholesome, then we have at least one count of wholesome because we have recognized it. So there is never a loss in recognizing. It's always good. So it's helpful, whatever the sphere of awareness we're going to pay attention to, in this case, thoughts and mental activity, including thinking. It's helpful to just start off grounding in perhaps with body sensations, perhaps sounds, and to let the settling process and the settling back process of relaxing just center around those spheres. It can be one or it can be more. Body, breath, sounds. And in that settling, it may be that you are predominantly noticing the objects of awareness. The sensations through the body, the sound sensations, the thoughts, emotions. But you may sometimes also notice the quality of awareness. Notice the awareness, knowing objects. Awareness receiving objects, visual impressions or sensations, sounds. And perhaps having that same sense of receiving in relation to thoughts and thinking. Notice any tendency to reach out to a thought. We might find ourselves snatching and grabbing at a thought. And it slips through our fingers. So really relax around whether you notice thoughts or not. See if it's possible to settle back. Just let the thoughts come to you. And then if you'd like to, just having a go at recognizing the type of thoughts that you're aware of. And giving a thought or a number of thoughts a mental label quite softly. There's planning or anticipating. Or you might just want to label future thoughts. Or there's remembering. Or you could label past thoughts. Thoughts about the past. There might be rehearsing mind. Just getting ready to tell someone a story. Or repeating mind when you know that you've had that particular thought before. Perhaps it goes along with a slightly anxious mind state. Or the mind that thinks it's right. So don't think too much about the labels. They don't have to be spot on. but in some way they encapsulate or identify what's happening within the thinking process. Notice any judging thoughts or comparing mind. And make sure, especially with judging thoughts, that it's a gentle noticing. We're noticing with that unbiased quality of awareness. With the wisdom mind that understands that no one thought is better than another. It's all thinking. And if you find you've got caught up in thinking, in the content or the story, you can recognize storytelling mind. And if you find it keeps happening, then perhaps choose another sphere of awareness where you can simply resource awareness for a while. Perhaps body sensations, perhaps the breath. It might be something like the sensations in your hands if they're touching each other. Very simple. You'll still notice other things, and that's fine, but you can anchor in this one particular area. So notice if there's any attitude in the mind that thinks that you have to stop these thoughts. It might be something I call curbing mind. Just trying to clamp down a little bit on thinking. The job of awareness is just to recognize thoughts for what they are. Thinking happening. A thought object arising in the mind, persisting for a very short period of time and disappearing. See if it's possible to enjoy awareness of thinking. And to appreciate your mind, appreciate the awareness for being willing to do the work, the practice. So just a couple of minutes to where you might want to stretch your legs. You might just want to reflect on that practice, on where you felt engaged, curious. What was your experience of working with thinking thoughts? And in a couple of minutes, we'll continue. I'll lead us into a slightly different exploration. Checking in with your experience, the awareness of different objects through the senses, the physical senses, and the mind sense. When you notice thoughts and thinking, You can continue to use labels if you'd like to, or you can just use awareness to recognize that thinking is happening without adding an additional label. In this meditation, I'm going to explore a bit more, tune in to some of the different ways that thoughts and thinking manifest. Tuning in more to how thoughts and thinking feel in the mind. And keeping a very light touch here. Just having that sense of looking very softly out of the corner of the mind's eye. And if it's helpful, you can have your eyes open with that soft, broad peripheral vision. It's perfectly possible to know we're thinking with our eyes open. We do it all the time. So some thoughts feel more obvious and intentional. There's some drive behind them. And they might feel quite loud in the mind, quite definite. Other types of thoughts can feel quieter and lighter, and perhaps connected quite loosely with a slender thread between one and the next one. And then there can be a subtle inner narrative happening in what feels like the depths of the mind, and that it always seems to be going on in one shape or form. A thought doesn't necessarily come in just words or images. There can be all sorts of fragments of experience that form an inner language. Perhaps there's a quality of knowing, an inner direction or impulse, or various different perceptions and feelings. Being curious about what your experience is. What actually happens when there's a thought? Is there some sort of movement in the mind? Some sort of vibration? How do you know that you're thinking? How do you know that thinking is happening on its own? Relaxing into awareness of knowing different objects, including thoughts, as they arise and pass away. Watch a thought fall apart under a soft, curious, open, and attentive awareness. So we've got a few minutes until the end of the session. If anyone would like to say anything about what they noticed, what caught their interest during either of those two practices. Can be something quite small, but just caught your interest or attention.
I've got Kaz.
Kaz?
Oh yeah. So I've noticed that with the mindful awareness, it has a feeling of open and expansion. But then when a thought comes in, and this includes labeling as well, there's a feeling of like concentration around a point, and it sort of takes away from that feeling of openness and expansion.
Yeah. So when you say it takes away from it, what's that experience like? Is that unpleasant or?
It's a neutral feeling.
Okay.
And it's just that observation of those sort of changing in feeling tones and states of experience.
Yeah, great, good. So there's a different tone or different nature, perhaps, too, between the awareness and the particular object. Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you.
With me,
Go on then, Matt.
with me, it was as if the thoughts were not being. I wasn't not allowing them, but they weren't sort of getting through or getting any kind of a grip. Yeah, I wasn't rejecting them outright, but they didn't have any gravity in them. I was just like foam on the water, to use that sort of metaphor, and they would just come and go without prompting. Yeah. There was no kind of I'll think of this, I'll think of that, I'll think of the next thing. It was just thoughts were arising and falling, like an angler's lure. Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah. And there was nothing unpleasant nor pleasant about them. It was just that was what was happening.
And could you know them clearly as thoughts?
They were trying to be mind objects.
Yeah.
They were old mind objects that had worked at a previous time, bits of memories, of course, bits of creative thinking going on. Yeah. But it didn't have a goal, an aim, a purpose. Yeah. Quite so I was quite playful with me.
Playful
and it
is
just
good.
disappeared, you know.
Yeah, great.
That was it.
Just coming and going.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So
Tracy.
Tracy.
Can you hear me okay?
Can't quite hear you. No,
How's that? Is that better?
very, very faint.
Oh. Is that any better, Vajradevi?
Yeah.
Thank you. Sort of coming on a little bit from what Matthew just said, but it was, I could see some ideas and pictures, and so there wasn't sort of verbal stuff that I could recognize a lot of the time. But what I did notice is when it did begin, the thoughts did begin to manifest themselves as something I would recognize as a thought, if you like. They disappeared. And I thought I heard you say something at the end of when you were leading around about sort of disappeared in the light of awareness. And I didn't know if it was possible to continue to be aware of the thought and it continue. It sort of stops it in its tracks, really, the awareness.
Okay. For some reason, I've got an echo with you. I'm not sure why. Hopefully, everybody else hasn't got the echo as well. Oh, it's gone. Yeah. So I think thoughts. If the attention, if the awareness, and the effort is a little bit strong, then that can stop thoughts. They can just stop dead. It's like they're quite subtle thoughts, and they're met with something that's just sort of blows them out of the water a bit, or stops them. But what I was saying at the end of the meditation was a bit more pointing to, well, what is a thought? We give a thought a certain sort of concepts make things sound quite sort of concrete or quite real or quite definable. But what I was pointing to there is when we look in experience at what we call a thought, and we look at it in quite a soft way, then what happens? What happens to what is the experience of a thought then? And it can be that you just notice there's various sort of fragments. It's a bit like flotsam and jetsam in the sea, and they're loosely sort of strung together. But they're very different to how you might think about a thought. So it's just pointing to that sort of exploration, really, about what we take to be so real and we give a lot of power to. When it comes down to it in our actual experience, what's happening? What can we learn? What can be known about thinking? This thing that directs our lives and makes us to gets us to sometimes we need thinking. We obviously have a lot of it's absolutely essential, but it can also lead us up a lot of wrong paths. So it's just pointing to the nature of what is a thought and what is thinking.
Thank you.
There's two more hands.
Okay, who's the next?
There's Jazz and Angela.
Okay, so Jazz.
Thank you, Vajradevi. I'd just like to say that what I have found particularly helpful is giving specific labels to the thoughts. And I was saying this to Tejadani during our review this morning, that by labeling my thoughts, I have actually found that the gap between the thoughts is getting longer and longer. In fact, I'm actually looking out for the thoughts, thinking, why aren't there any thoughts now? But I need to stop doing that. And I'm sure I'll be able to do that with more practice. But
you're aware that you're doing it. You're aware that the mind is now watching out for thoughts. Yes. So that's great. That's good. Yeah, thank you. So maybe very quickly, Angela, has had her hand up for a little while. So
Oh, hi.
hi.
Hey, I was really interested when you asked what actually happens when there's a thought. Is there movement or a vibration in the mind? And it was almost kind of scary how I suddenly noticed that it's as if it was strong. It was almost as if when there's a new thought, depending on the tone of it or the quality of it, it can almost switch on a whole different shade or tone or color in the whole of my being. And well, it can feel like that's what's happening, but of course it doesn't endure really. But I think what I can do is I can then give that a lot of power. I can give that sense that something's happened and it's horrible, or it feels funny, or I'm triggered into something very old. But of course it's just momentary. But it was just so strong, just seeing that it's like a light switch, but it's not switching on a light, it's like it's switching on a whole something. It was very useful.
Yeah, good. Yeah. Sounds like it in a way, each thought sounds like it was evoking a world in that moment, for that moment. Yeah.
I hadn't quite seen that maybe quite as strongly.
Yeah, great.
The power of that.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, we're just after 6 o'clock, so we'll leave it there. Thanks again for people being willing to just offer their experience that we all benefit from, I think, from hearing. And I look forward to seeing you all in a couple of hours. Turn up for Vajrasattva. Okay. So
Thank you. Thanks, Vajradevi.
thank you.